Face masks, something you've been very vocal about. Tell me why. Why are those the things that you see so many issues with?
Well, it's not me that's been vocal about it. It's been the governments of the world have been vocal. They've suddenly, long after the major danger of epidemic was over, they've suddenly embarked on this curious program of making people, by the force of law and the threat of fines, don these curious garments. Things which they themselves have said in the past are not much use. I mean, I have a small treasury of British government quotes saying, actually, masks aren't much use, which they put in their own publications, which their own medical officers said. And then suddenly, right at the end of all this, when the number of deaths is tiny, and the disease is plainly weakened enormously, and the evidence for these, particularly for those pale blue cloth masks you see everywhere, the evidence for a loose cloth mask, which is being constantly touched by its wearer, being effective against anything, is very slender. Suddenly there's this great campaign to impose on people. Well, it must make, surely, a questioning mind a little bit suspicious as to what this is about. I think it has several purposes. One is to sustain the atmosphere of fear and alarm. The other, which disturbs me considerably, is that it seems to me that anyone who puts one of these things on is engaging in what I call compelled speech. Is to say, well, they are putting on a badge. By putting this on, you're saying, I submit. It's a very submissive act, covering your face and removing a large part of your personality. It's a servile thing to do. And you're saying to everybody else who sees you in the street, on the train, in the shop, I agree with this policy. I accept what the government says. It's an armband or a lapel badge, and it's worn, even worse, on the face. And I think it's very peculiar. It seems to be a kind of Milgram experiment. You know what I mean by that? The great California experiment where a group of people were persuaded by alleged scientists to give electric shocks to their fellow creatures on the grounds that they were taking part in some good experiment. In fact, the electric shocks weren't real, and the howls of pain from the subjects were faked, but people were prepared to press buttons, giving people quite large electric shocks on the instructions of scientists. And here in this country and all the other mask-wearing countries, people are prepared to put these masks on because the government tells them to, because they're told it's good. And it's been said, and I think there's something to this, that if the government suddenly announced a discovery that the COVID virus hovered at 3 feet 6 inches above the ground, and everybody had to go back on their hands and knees, I think these people would do the same thing. There'd be a huge market in knee pads. And they could all take the knee.
And what about the idea that it also prevents communication with facial expression?
Well, it does that too, but it is a huge sorrow to people with hearing impairments, who have a really hard time because of it, I have to say. But obviously it's an important issue, but it's not central to the politics of it. But there is a cancelling of the personality by the wearing of a garment which actually goes across the face, which I find quite disturbing. And is it not? If some group in society began to instruct its members to go around like that, what would Alexander Boris Pfeffel Johnson government have done about that?
Yeah, because it means I can't understand your emotions. It also means you're immediately perceived as a threat to me when I see that mask. It's that badge.
A threat? I think the person wearing the mask looks almost as if they're peering out from inside something. I would say it's a captive thing. I find it both unjustified by any kind of real medical evidence and disturbing as a human act. And as with all kinds of other things, people say, why do you make such a fuss about it? An example, for instance, the metric system. I said, why do you make such a fuss about it? I said, I don't make a fuss about it. It's them making a fuss about it. I would have said nothing about this if the government hadn't suddenly started telling people they've got to wear them. Don't ask me why I'm obsessed about it. Ask the governments of all the Western countries why suddenly this extremely dubious alleged precaution is being pressed on people. I read the other day in a French newspaper of a French TGV on its way up from Aix-en-Provence, and the conductor announcing over the public address that not enough people were wearing face masks, so they were going to stop the train. So les services d'ordre, the police, could come on board and presumably drag off the non-compliers. Liberté, égalité, fraternité.
What should we all do as British citizens? Should we refuse?
Oh, dear. I'm not going to advocate law-breaking.
But you'll break the law.
No, I'm not going to advocate law-breaking, nor am I going to declare that I will myself break the law, no.
Okay.
No, I'm not. That's not the business that I'm in. I still believe in the rule of law, though it gets harder and harder to do as the law gets stretched and as its origins get so polluted by government by decree. But I think it really isn't for anyone in my position to advocate law breaking.
But to your evidence point about face masks and wearing of face masks by the general public, this has been a controversial area in pandemic preparedness and planning for the 15 years that I've been involved in it. And indeed, I was on the phone this morning to a colleague in Hong Kong who's a professor there, who's done the evidence review for the World Health Organization on face masks. And we're of the same mind that there is no evidence that general wearing of face masks by the public who are well affects the spread of the disease in our society. What matters right now, of course, is social distancing. And yes, it is true that we do see very large amounts of mask wearing, particularly in Southeast Asia. But we have always seen that for many decades, and it is entirely wired into some cultures that masks are worn quite frequently in open spaces. So it's very different, but in terms of the hard evidence and what the UK government recommends, we do not recommend face masks for general wearing by the public.
The evidence around the use of masks by the general public, especially outdoors, is extremely weak.
The evidence on face masks has always been quite variable, quite weak, quite difficult to know exactly, and there's no real trials on it. And we've undertaken a review. We'll give our advice to ministers and they'll make decisions about what to do around that.
Many countries have been buying face masks, as have we. But the position on face masks is unchanged.
In terms of wearing a mask, our advice is clear that wearing a mask if you don't have an infection really reduces the risk, almost not at all. So we do not advise that.
What I'd say is that on face masks we are guided by the science, and the government position hasn't changed. Professor McLean will explain the science. The government position, the UK government position, hasn't changed. Not least because the most important thing people can do is the social distancing.
The recommendation from SAGE is completely clear, which is that there is weak evidence of a small effect in which a face mask can prevent a source of infection going from somebody who is infected to the people around them. But the answer is clear that the evidence is weak and the effect is small, and we've passed that on to our colleagues in government with which to make a decision.
I can announce that as of Monday the 15th of June, face coverings will become mandatory on public transport. That doesn't mean surgical masks, which we must keep for clinical settings. It means the kind of face covering you can easily make at home. There'll be exemptions to these rules for very young children, for disabled people, and those with breathing difficulties.
What we've said for a while now is that we do think that masks have a great deal of value.
With more activity outside our homes, we would now advise people to wear a cloth face covering in enclosed spaces where social distancing is not always possible.
We've therefore come to the decision that face coverings should be mandatory in shops and supermarkets.
Just to be absolutely clear, I do think that face coverings have a real value in confined spaces and I think the public do understand that.
What we've been doing during COVID is the children's immunisations. We've just been trying to make sure that we can keep those going during these times. Do you want to explain a bit more, Marina?
Yes. You mean like the MMR and the BCG and all that jazz? Because there's all these anti-vaxxers now, isn't it?
Well, Marina can tell you a little bit about how we've achieved that.
This winter, you're going to have all sorts of pressures, aren't you? You're probably, I'm afraid, you're going to have a resurgence of the threat of COVID. That's definitely going to be there. And then everybody presenting with the symptoms of flu at the same time. It's going to be a massive pressure. So
this little wooden puppet.
I'm not a puppet. I'm a real boy.